Hello everybody, this is Miss Randa. I'm presenting to you the fifth year course. Hope you're all doing well. And this is was our Monday session, and let's just go ahead and start. So we're going to start with our lesson. First, let's make a quickly good recap about the important life events we all talked about before. So we have different life events, for example, like the first birthday, your first haircut, losing your first tooth, and the first day of school, and sweet 16. This is the part of being a teenager, and of course after graduation, your high school graduations and the college graduation, then you get your first job. After that you become more responsible and you feel like you're more independent with the money. And then you have the marriage that makes you, after you fall in love with someone, then you get married to start building a life. And then you become a parent, which makes you more responsible for caring for someone else other than yourself. After that, at the end, you retire and maybe you can stay with your grandchildren or have a peaceful life at home. The next thing, we talked about the grammar. We talked about the time, different time clause like before and after and once and the moment and as soon as and until and by the time. And we had different things like when we talked about before and after, we said before I had my first job I was really immature. So I'm talking here about the first action that when I was really immature here, that I didn't realize that, then then I had my first job. So I was really immature, then I had my first job. Okay, then after here, after I got my first job, I became mature. So this is very important because now I'm switching them. So I'm talking here about two events, one happening after the other, after before the other. So we're talking here which one here is the first action. So I got my first job, then I became mature. And then we have here another example. Once I had a job, I became totally independent. Again, when we talked about once, that I'm talking about that two actions that happen right after one another. And also we have the same thing that has the same idea is as soon as you remember. Like we have an example here. As soon as I got my own bank account, I started to be responsible. Again, here the first action happened that I got my bank account, then I started to be more responsible. And we have different things here like the moment and until and by the time. Take a look here. So again, here we talked about once and as soon as, when we two events happen quickly after the other. Like as soon as you're hired for your first job, you feel more confidence, or as soon as you fell in love, you get married. So I'm talking here about different events happening one after the other. And then we have here the moment here, when I'm talking about two events happen together in a specific time. Like for example, the moment John got married, he felt like an adult. So the first action here I'm talking about is John getting married, then he felt like an adult. Then we have here until. It means that to that time and no longer. So for example, until I met Donna, I hadn't known what friendship was. So if we're gonna talk about the first action here, so the first action here that I met Donna first, then I know what friendship was. Again, here we have by the time, when I'm talking about one event that is completed before another event. Like for example, by the time I graduated, I had already found a job. So I graduated first, then after that I had found a job. Okay, here we have an exercise. We are going to match this column A with column B. We're gonna start with number 1. We have here, by the time I was 15, so this is gonna be letter D. I realized that I wasn't a child anymore. Then number 2, until I started working part-time, we have, this is gonna be letter G. I had never saved any money. Number 3, the moment I got my first paycheck, this is gonna be right B. I began to understand the value of money. And number four, as soon as I left home, this is gonna be letter E, I had learned how to take care of myself. Number five, once I started sharing an apartment, yes, this is letter E, I had learned how to take care of myself. Number six, after I began a relationship, as always, I learned that love can hurt. This is gonna be letter C. Before I traveled abroad, I didn't appreciate my own country. And last but not least, until I got really sick, I hadn't understood the importance of a good health. So, and that's it. Move on. We have here different kinds of experiences, and I want each one to make a sentence out of these eight about the things that can teach us to do, and the thing that it's gonna be like a turning point in our life, or like a milestone like we talked about. So we have an example here. Once you get a credit card, you learn it's important not to overspend. So we have another example. Let's try to make another example. As soon as I went out on my first date, I realized that I'm falling in love, or I fell in love. You can do this together, alone, as some practice. Okay, as you can see here, we have listening. You can check out the audio. This is the audio, and we're going to fill in here. We're gonna listen to three people, Sally, Henry, and Debbie, talking about their different life events and how that affected them. So you can listen. You have the audio here, and just listen to it and just write it down. Let's move on. Okay, here we have vocabulary. We have the words carefree and conscientious and pragmatic. Let's take one by one. We have carefree. This is a person who's light-hearted and a person who isn't always worried, and you feel he's relaxed. You can spot him in parties. He is that person who's just sitting there and probably drinking or just hanging out. So let's take a look at the example. He looked happy and carefree in the party. We have another one, conscientious. So from its name, conscientious, this comes from conscious. So this is, we're talking about a person who is always following his conscience, and he's trying to do the right thing, and he's thinking very carefully before he takes any step. We have an example here. She was a popular and conscientious teacher. The third word here is pragmatic. Pragmatic person. So from its name we can say this person is organized, or he thinks in a practical kind of way, and he also solves the problem in a practical way, just like we have the definition here. So we can take a look at this example. We must find a pragmatic approach to save the company. So a pragmatic here means a realistic approach that can actually save the company, and kind of realistic or sensible. Let's move on. We have another word is rebellious, and I think this word is very interesting because rebellious here, this is related usually to being a teenager. So when you are a teenager, you're always the kind of person who doesn't like to follow the rules, and who don't usually listen to his teachers, and they always argue with their friends and argue with their parents because they tell them what to do. So the best example here to have to talk about a teenager, so he was a rebellious teenager who never obeyed his teachers. The fourth word, I think the fifth word, is sensible. Like we talked about pragmatic, so sensible here comes from making sense. So this is a person who makes sense of his decisions, and when he makes decisions, they are based on reason, not emotion. So this is a person who doesn't like to to talk about his emotions very well, but when he makes his decisions, he makes them in a very organized and pragmatic way. So we have an example here. I think the sensible thing would be to take a taxi home. So we can say this probably as the sensible thing to take a taxi home. So maybe this person is drunk, so the sensible thing not to drive while you're drunk. So the best thing or the reasonable thing is to take a taxi home. We have another word here is called sophisticated, and the opposite of sophisticated is naive. So I think you understand the meaning of naive, but we're just gonna take a look at it very quickly. So I'm talking about a person who's naive, who's inexperienced in dealing with people or different situations. Like he's a person who can trust people easily. So we have an example here. I can't believe you were so naive as to trust him. So you trusted someone because you lack experience, so it is probably backfires. And we talked about naive, so the total opposite is sophisticated. So sophisticated, this is a person who's educated and cultured and wise, which means that person you can locate in universities, like the professors, or someone who is a reader, who reads a lot and who talks about different topics with an ease. This is usually a sophisticated person. So we have an example here. Mark is a smart and sophisticated young man. Different vocabulary we discussed here. So if we're going to guess here, at what age do you think people have these kinds of traits? So we have here in their teens, in their 20s, in their 30s, and in their 40s, and in their 60s. So we have here, for example, ambitious. I think being ambitious, this comes when you are, usually when you are in your teens. So when you are a teenager, and it started to get when you are in 20s, and sometimes a lot of people say when they are 30s they are still ambitious, but I don't think it's gonna be here. Argumentative, this is a person who likes to argue a lot. So I feel like a person who can be argumentative, this usually when you are in your 20s, maybe your teens, because you're arguing a lot with your parents because you're they don't listen to you or they don't understand you, so you tend to argue with them. And we have, again, we talked about carefree, the person who is relaxed. So I think we can talk about when you are relaxed and has nothing to worry about because you've already done everything in your life. So it is possibly in when you are in your 60s or maybe late 40s. When someone is conscientious, I think this can go for your whole life according to the morals or how you were taught. So if we're gonna talk about the 20s, maybe the 30s, how can you start your own life? How can you make decisions? This is usually in these kinds of areas, like in the 20s or 30s. A naive person, probably we're talking about maybe your teens, and some people in their 20s until they get a bad experience and learn from it. We have pragmatic. You can be pragmatic, I think, when you have your first job and you start to think differently. So we have here pragmatic. I think it is gonna be when you are in your 30s, maybe 40s, like pragmatic and sophisticated here. So we have these two things which are a little bit similar, and also we have sensible. So we're talking about 30s and 40s, so you're an adult now and you can make your own decisions without being emotional, or you can understand how to make the right decision in every situation. Not in every situation, but at least you can learn. Okay, and we have here, we missed one here, is rebellious. So rebellious here, I think this is more likely to be in your teenagers, like we talked about that, because you disagree with everybody. Okay.